What is cybersecurity from a developer point of view? Return of Linux. What is cybersecurity from a developer point of view? Return of Linux. Users, groups, and permissions. There are two things on a Unix system that aren't represented by files. User accounts, group accounts. User account represents someone of something capable of using files. Can be associated with both actual human beings and processes. Group account. A list of user accounts. Each user account is defined with the main group members and may belong to as many groups as you need it to. Simple file permissions. Each file on a Unix system has two owners, a user and a group. Each user and a group has its own set of permissions that specify what the user or group may do with the file. Read it, write it, delete it, execute it. Other user accounts that don't own the file or belong to that group that owns it. Listing 225.3 shows a long file listing for the file /home /master /bait and dealers.txt. rw/1 master connectors listing 25 file listing showing permissions. Directory permissions. Execute translates to use anything within or change working directory to this directory. If a user or group has execute permissions on a given directory, the user or group can list that directory's contents that reads the files, change its own working directory. If a user and a group does not have executable permissions on a given directory, it will be unable to list, read, regardless of the permissions set on those things. Set to it and set to get. Two of the most dangerous permission bits in Unix. If the set on the executable, the setGet causes the program to run as a member of the group that owns it regardless of who executes it. If set on the executable binary file, the set to it bit causes that program to run as its own no matter who executes. Very dangerous if set on any file owned by root or any other privileged account or group. Numeric modes. Internally, Linux uses numbers to represent permissions. Consists of bordens. As you read left to right, these represent special permission users, permission groups, and other. Each permission has numeric values in the permission in each digit place. The digit represents the sum of all permission bits you wish to set. Basic numeric values are 4 for read, 2 for write, 1 for execute. These values represent bits in a binary system and therefore are all powers of 2. If user permits sets to set 7, this represents 4 for read, 2 for write, and 1 for execute. Linux vulnerabilities. Some common vulnerabilities in default Linux installations, unpatched and unsecured, have been buffer overflows, race conditions, abusive programs run set to it root, denial of service, web application vulnerabilities, rootkit attacks. OS installation, software selection, and initial setup. Linux system security begins at operating system installation. Now, here are the list of software packages that should seldom, if ever, be installed on hard-end servers, especially internet-facing servers. X Windows System, RPC service, R services, Internet, Simp, Daemons, Telnet, and other clear-text logon services. Patching. Carefully selecting what gets installed on a Linux system is an important first step in security. All the server's applications you do install must be configured securely, and they must also be kept to date with security patches. There will always be software vulnerabilities to attackers and are able to exploit for some period of time before vendors issue patches for them. Unpatchable vulnerabilities are known as zero-day vulnerabilities. Antivirus software. Historically, Linux has Linux has not nearly been so vulnerable to viruses as other operating systems. Most Linux system administrators tend to rely on keeping up to date with security patches for protection against malware. Worms have historically been much bigger threat against Linux systems than viruses. Viruses typically abuse the privilege of whatever users unwillingly execute them. As Linux population used to grow, we can expect Linux viruses to become much more common. User management. The guiding principle in Linux user account security are be very careful when setting file and directory permissions, using group memberships to differentiate between different roles on your system. Be extremely careful in granting and using root privileges command movement. CMON commands sets and changes permissions for objects belonging to existing groups, user and group. User add, user mod, user del are used to create, mod, and delete accounts. Group add, group mod, group del commands are used to create, modify, and delete group accounts. Password aging. Maximum and minimum lifetime for user passwords. Set globally in the files of etc. login devs and etc. dev user add. Passwords should have a minimum age to prevent users from rapidly cycling through password changes in attempt to reuse old passwords. If maximum age is too long, the odds of a password being exposed before being changed will increase. However, if too short, users may get frustrated with having to change their passwords frequently, leading to mistreatment of their password. Defunct user accounts should be disabled or deleted promptly. Root delegation, su and sudo. The fundamental problem with Linux and Unix security is that permission and authority on a given system boil down. Root can do anything, users cannot do much. Su, provided you know the root password, you can use the su command to promote yourself to the root from whatever user you logged in as. Sudo, short for super user 2. Standard package on most Linux distributions allow you to execute specified commands as root without actually needing to know the root password. Windows Security Fundamental Architecture. Anyone who wants to understand Windows security must have a knowledge of basic fundamental security blocks in the operating system. Some of the components of Windows that make up fundamental security infrastructure are the Security Reference Monitor (SRM), the Local Security Authority (LSA), the Security Account Manager (SAM), Active Directory (AD), authentication packages, WinLogin, and NetLogin. The Security Reference Monitor (SRM), the kernel mode component performs access checks, generates audit log entries, and manipulates user rights, also called privileges. Ultimately, every permission check is performed by the SRM. Most modern operating systems include SRM type functionality that performs privilege permission checks. SRMs tend to be small in size, so as their correctness can be verified. Local security authorities resides in a user mode process named ISS-XK and is responsible for implementing local security policies in Windows. It also issues security tokens to accounts so they log on to this. A security policy includes password policy, auditing policy, and privilege settings, such as complexity, rules, and expiration time. Auditing policies, which operates on which objects to audit. Security Account Manager is a database that stores data and relevant security information about local principals and groups. When a user logs onto the computer using a local account, the SAM process takes logon information and performs a lookup against SAM database. The credentials matched the user can log. The SAM file is binary rather than text, and passwords are stored using the MD4 hash out. On Windows or Vista later, SAM stores password information using a password-based key derivation function, which is substantially more robust against password guessing attacks than MD4. Active Directory. Microsoft's LDAP directory includes a Windows Server 2000 and later. All current supported client versions of Windows, including Windows XP and Windows 7, can communicate with AD to perform security operations, including account logon. Windows client will authenticate using AD when user logs onto the computer using a domain account rather than a local account. Got you. Local versus domain. A network Windows computers can be just done in one or two configurations, either domain joined or in a worker. When a computer is domain joined, users can gain access to the computer using domains, which are centrally managed in AD. They can also log on using local accounts, but local accounts may not have access to domain resources such as network ports, web servers, email servers. When a computer is a work group, only a local is held in essence. A domain has a major advantage of being centrally managed and more secure. User account can be disabled rather than on all individual computers, and security policies are also centrally managed when using AD. The only advantage of using local accounts is that a computer does not need infrastructure to require the support using AD. In a workgroup collection of all computers connected to one another using a network, the mission uses only local accounts. The difference between workgroup and domain is simply where accounts are authenticated. Windows Security Basics. Before a user can log on to the Windows networks, the domain administrator must add the user's account information to the system. It includes the user's name, account name, and password. After the administration has entered this information, Windows creates an account for the users in the domain controller Active Directory. Each user account is uniquely expressed by like a security ID, SID. SIDs are unique within a domain, and every account gets a different SID. Privileges in Windows. Privileges are essentially system-wide permissions assigned to user accounts. Some privileges are deemed dangerous, which means a malicious account that is granted such as a privilege can cause damage. Example of dangerous privileges include act as a part of operating system privilege. That is the most dangerous privilege in Windows and is granted only in the local system account. Even administrators are not granted it. Debug programs privilege. The privilege basically means the user can run any code he or she wants in any running room. Backup files and directories privileges. Any process of running with this privilege will bypass all access control list checks. Access control list. Windows has two forms of ACL. Two important things to keep in mind about access control in Windows. Objects that require protection are assigned a DACL and possibly a SACL, which includes a SID of the object owner, usually the object creator, as well as the list of ACEs. Windows has two forms of ACL. Discretionary ACL, usually what most people mean when they say ACL, grants or denies access to protected resources in Windows such as files, shared memory, namepads, etc. System ACL, SACL, used for audit in Windows Vista, used for enforce mandatory integrity policies. Two important things to keep in mind about access in Windows. There's no implied access. When a Windows application accesses an object, it must request the type of access the application requires. Following no. Access control entities. Each ACA in the DCL determines access, and an ACA can be allow ACA or deny ACA. Includes an SID and an access matrix. An access mask could include the ability to read, write, create, delete, and modify. Access control. When a user account attempts to access a protected account, the operating system performs an access it. It compares the user account and group information in users tokens and the ACAs in the object's ACL. If all requested operations are granted, then access is granted. Otherwise, the user gets access denied error status. Windows vulnerabilities. After 2001, Microsoft decided to change its software development process to better accommodate secure design, coding, testing, and maintenance requirements with the goal of reducing number of vulnerabilities in all Microsoft products. Security development lifecycle core, mandatory security education, security design requirements, threat modeling, and attack surface analysis and reduction, secure coding requirements and tools, secure testing requirements and tools, security push, DEPA, financial security review, security responsibility. Windows security defenses, account defenses, network defenses, memory corruption defenses, browser defenses. Account defenses. Principle of at least privilege dictates that users should operate just enough privilege to get the task done and no more. Windows XP and Windows Servers 2003 add a feature named secondary login, which allows a user account to right-click on application, select run as, and then enter another user account and password to run the application. Restricted token is a thread token with privileges removed and or SIDs marked as denied only SIDs. User account control. When a user wants to perform a privilege operation, the user is prompted to enter an administrator's account names and passwords. If the user is an administrator, then the user is prompted to consent to the operation, often referred to as an over-the-shoulder logon. Network defense firewall. With all versions of since XP have been built-in software firewall, the version included with the XP was limited that it was not enabled by default. Its configuration was limited by blocking only inbound connections on specific with changes in XP such as SP2. Option to open a port to the internet but only a local subnet in order for users with multiple computers in their home to share files and print documents. Firewall is enabled by default. Changes in Vista and later firewalls is fully integrated component and rewritten TCP size IP network stack. A firewall supports optional blocking outbound connections. Further security measures: heap randomization, image randomization, service restart policy. Heap randomization, designed to take some of the predictability away from the attack. When a heap is created, the start of the heap is offset by 0.4 MB. This feature is new to Windows Vista. Image randomization. When an operation system boots, it starts in 256 configured. In other words, the entire operating system is shifted up and down in memory when it booted. This makes the operating system less predictable for attackers and makes it less likely that an exploit will succeed. Service restart pole. In Vista, Microsoft sets some of the critical services to restart only twice, and after which the service will not restart unless the admin manually restarts the service. This gives the attacker only 2 attempts to get the attacker to work. Browser defenses. A malicious web page could take advantage of many attack vectors. Code and data makes for a rich and productive end-user environment, but it's hard to secure. Web browsers can also render various multimedia objects. Many file formats are rendered by helper object code MIE handles. ActiveX opt-in. New feature added by Internet Explorer. Essentially unloads ActiveX controls by default, and when a control is used for the first time, the user is prompted to allow the control to run protected mode. When this default configuration is used, Internet Explorer runs at a low integrity, making it more difficult for malware to manipulate the operating system, which operates at a medium or higher integrity level. ASLR and DIB. Current versions of the Internet Explorer also enable these by default.